Doctor Who's first ever big screen adventure saw Peter Cushing playing the role of the eccentric scientist Doctor Who, joined by his two granddaughters, Susan and Barbara, and accompanied by Barbara's new clumsy boyfriend Ian as they ventured on an unexpected and exciting journey. Arriving on an unnamed alien planet, they encounter the evil machine creatures, the Daleks, who are attempting to rid the planet of all life in order to become the dominant rulers. Both the Peter Cushing Dalek films are often forgotten or just completely ignored by Doctor Who fans, but today I want to discuss what I love about this underrated classic and why I think you should all watch it. So join me as I discuss Doctor Who and the Daleks.
I'm the Doctor.
Fantastic. I reverse the polarity of the neutron flow.
Have you ever thought what it's like to be wanderers in the fourth dimension?
Amicus Productions, known for producing medium to low budget horror movies of the 1960s and 1970s, wanted to cash in on the huge success of the Dalek craze at the time, and decided to purchase the rights from the BBC and Terry Nation, aka the creator of the Daleks, to produce 3 Dalek films for a total of £500. But there was one problem. Amicus had never tackled anything like this before, and knew that to pull it off on such a large scale would be incredibly costly. What they needed was more finance for the film, and partnered up with John Vigoda, who agreed to co-finance the films provided that his company, Aru Productions, was solely credited as producing the films. Which is why you only see Aru in the credits, but the films are essentially an Amicus production. Doctor Who and the Daleks was directed by Gordon Fleming, with screenplay by Amicus co-founder Milton Subotsky, with input from Doctor Who's actual script editor, David Whittaker, due to Terry Nation being unavailable at the time. Doctor Who and the Daleks is essentially a re-adaptation of the original Dalek story, and like every adaptation there's always bound to be some changes. So let's take a look at some of the most noticeable deviations. All the main characters have been completely reimagined. The Doctor is no longer an alien. No. He's a human inventor called Doctor Who. His last name is actually Who. Cushing's version of the character has a much more soft and warmer personality compared to that of William Hartnell. Both Ian and Barbara are no longer school teachers. Instead, Barbara, played by Jenny Linden, is Doctor Who's eldest granddaughter, and does lack the same level of depth and inquisitive nature as Jacqueline Hill's Barbara, and unfortunately doesn't really have much to do in the film. Roy Castle plays Ian, who is Barbara's new boyfriend, and more of the comic relief for the film. He's no longer this brave, heroic character. Instead, he's more clumsy and buffoonish, and is really only there just to add levity. At times, he can be quite annoying, but his character does develop through the course of the film, and actually ends up being the one that saves the day. Roberta Tovey plays Susan, also known by Susie, and is Doctor Who's second granddaughter, now an 11-year-old girl as opposed to being a teenager. Susan is an intellectual genius, who is headstrong and much more independent than that of Carol Ann Ford's version, and honestly, out of all 3 companions, Susie is easily the most likeable. The TARDIS is now simply referred to as TARDIS, and is Doctor Who's latest invention. While its exterior still matches the original of being a police box, the same can't be said for its interior. It doesn't feature any roundels or even have the familiar 6-sided console, but instead resembles more of a mad scientist's laboratory, with cables and machinery placed throughout. But hey, it's still bigger on the inside. TARDIS itself operates slightly differently as well compared to that of the original.
When I push that lever, this room and everything in it will dissolve into their respective component electrical charges. These charges will then be transferred in time and space and reassembled in their proper order and their proper place.
The Thal people have more of an alien appearance compared to their original counterparts, now having more of a grey bluish skin tone, and all seem to have the exact same hairdresser. The Daleks' dome lights as well don't operate in the same way they do on TV, they just randomly flash, and aren't synced whenever the Daleks talk. This is because the director wasn't aware that the dome lights were supposed to be keyed to the Dalek speech so you could identify which Dalek is talking. Also, because having a blast array effect would have been way too expensive at the time, and trying to achieve the same negative colour effect in the TV series would have been also greatly expensive because it was shot on film as opposed to shot in video, the Daleks now just simply spray people to death with a fire extinguisher. They were actually going to have the Daleks shoot flames, but the censors feared that it would be way too frightening for children. Oh man, what could have been. I always like to think of the Daleks develop some sort of radioactive gas that just kills people instantly. We also don't get the iconic theme tune. Instead, we're greeted to a weird but rather bizarre theme by Barry Gray, but it does feel in line with the rest of the film. There are other small alterations made to the script, with things being removed or cut down, but most of the changes are to make it more appealing to a younger audience and to tighten up the story. After all, this is a feature film and not a TV series. The changes to Ian, Barbara and Susan make complete sense. Rather than spending the first 15 minutes to establish each character, it's much more practical to have them all be known to each other, so that we can get to the planet of the Daleks as quickly as possible. Now the reason I say planet of the Daleks and not Skaro is because it is never actually stated in the film that the planet is called Skaro, but it is mentioned in the sequel. I mean, you can definitely tell it's set on an alien world, with the dead giveaway being the lava lamps.
Do you like our lava lamps?
Yeah, fun fact, lava lamps actually originated from the planet Skaro. Now, when it comes to Peter Cushing's portrayal as Doctor Who, I saw the Daleks' invasion of Earth 2150 AD first, when I was a kid, and seeing that the Doctor was now human, and called Doctor Who, that really drove me nuts. In fact, I hated it. But you have to accept the fact that this is a completely different iteration, and that the films themselves are separate from the TV series. And years on, I've grown to appreciate not only the films, but Peter Cushing's performance as well. He's not trying to emulate William Hartnell's Doctor, he makes the character his own, as this wonderfully eccentric inventor that's adventurous and excited to explore, whilst also pulling off the charming and gentle, caring, grandfatherly figure. As I stated before, the film is basically a remake of the first Dalek story, The Daleks, written by Terry Nation, only with a much larger budget and an overall different tone. All the dark, bleak seriousness of the original has been scrubbed away, in favour of having a much more upbeat, fun family adventure, with a lot more comedy interjected as well. But other than that, it's essentially the same story. We have our characters arriving on a strange alien world, they explore and find a city, and then discover they're suffering from radiation sickness because of the high levels of radiation on the surface. They discover the Daleks and become their prisoners. The Daleks send Susan to retrieve the case of anti-radiation drugs that was left outside the doors of TARDIS by one of the Thal people. Susan meets one of the Thals called Aladon, but only this time he's their leader, and gives Susan another case of drugs. She returns back to the Daleks, giving one case to the Daleks, who also allow her to give the other case to her fellow prisoners. The Daleks then listen into their conversation and hatch a plan to bring the Thals to the Dalek city. Doctor Who and the crew escape from the cell via Ian posing as a Dalek. Then the Thals arrive to meet the Daleks, and Doctor Who tries to warn them that it's a trap. Some Thals get gunned down, but most of them manage to get back to the safety of the forest. Then Doctor Who and the gang are ready to leave, but realise that the Daleks took the fluid link from TARDIS when they were prisoners and can't leave without it. So Doctor Who, instead of Ian this time, encourages the Thals to fight back against the Daleks. And because the Thals' anti-radiation drugs don't work for the Daleks, they're like, screw it, we're going to release a neutron bomb to wipe out the Thals. So the Thals break into two factions to storm the Dalek city. One small group led by Ian going through the swamp and up the mountain, and the other led by Doctor Who using mirrors to confuse the Dalek senses. But the Doctor and Susan get captured by the Daleks, and the Daleks then start the countdown to release the neutron bomb. The remaining Thals then go to rescue Doctor Who and meet up with Ian and Barbara and the other Thals, and they defeat the Daleks and stop the countdown. Then Doctor Who and the gang leave the planet, but instead of running directly into the next episode, The Edge of Destruction, TARDIS lands in Roman times, and that's pretty much it. Doctor Who and the Daleks was made for £180,000, and upon its release in 1965, the film became a financial success and landed in the top 20 slot of the highest grossing films in the UK of that year, which is pretty impressive. Unfortunately, not the same can be said for the US market, where Doctor Who itself was still relatively unknown. In fact, Doctor Who wouldn't be shown on US television until the early 1970s with Jon Pertwee. But because of the film's financial success in the UK, a sequel was greenlit and almost immediately rushed into production. Now, I do like the original televised Dalek story, but I can't say that often I want to go back and rewatch it. This is a much more streamlined version, but honestly, I think I prefer it. The characters are engaging, and the production design is very impressive, with a great sense of scope given to all the sets, with the Dalek control room being much more vast and open, with some really cool massive looking control boards that can rotate depending on what the Daleks need. The front entrance to the Dalek city is also quite impressive, looking like it was actually built on top of a mountain. And then there's the petrified forest, which is just fantastic as well, by just a simple but terrific use of stylized coloured lighting to achieve an unworldly look and feel to the forest. And then there's the real stars of the film, the Daleks themselves. They have a slight redesign, but are still based on those original blueprints. And I gotta confess, the blue Dalek drones are one of the best looking Daleks ever. And the second in command, the red Dalek, is pretty damn awesome as well. And the one thing the film does so well is they really take advantage of the fact that the film is shot in colour. And remember, this would have been the first time that audiences got to see the Daleks in colour. But the Daleks are slightly different from their original look, now armed with a claw instead of the sink plunger, have red rectangular dome lights, and have thicker bases that raise them up, making them even more imposing. Very similar to the ones seen in the Dalek invasion of Earth. And this is the really cool thing. They got the original Dalek voice actors, Peter Hawkins and David Graham, to provide the voices for the film, and even got some of the original Dalek operators as well. The Daleks in this are great. The way they're shot and portrayed being very imposing and threatening, and literally feels like there's hundreds of them scattered all throughout the city. I honestly don't think the film deserves the negative response it gets from fans. A lot of people will flat out say they hate it because of the changes made in this that differ from the TV show.
He stinks and I don't like him.
Yeah, they are drastic deviations, but you have to accept the fact that this is its own thing and not part of the show. It's the Daleks on the big screen, and the film gives you that. Gordon Fleming did a fantastic job directing the film. It has a gorgeous looking production design. Peter Cushing is wonderfully charming as this eccentric inventor who's oozing with joy and has this whole sense of adventure that he brings to the role. I decided to watch this back to back with the Daleks in colour that was released last year, and I still much prefer this. I would say out of all three versions, this is probably going to be the most accessible version of that original story, in my opinion. So why should you watch Doctor Who and the Daleks? Well, as I stated before, it's the more accessible version of the original Dalek story. The original was 7 parts, and in my opinion, really did suffer from pacing issues. This is a streamlined version of that original story, and although the suspense and dark tone are no longer present, and I think some of the comedy could have been removed, because Ian does get a bit annoying, the film isn't mind-blowingly good, but it certainly is an entertaining watch. You don't need to watch the original televised story to understand what it's about. The film does a marvellous job of bringing the audience along for a fun adventure. It's never dull and flies by at a brisk pace. I would encourage anyone to check out the film if you haven't seen it. If you have, I would still encourage you then to go back and revisit it. It's probably better than you remember. Hell, even if you're not a Doctor Who fan and you want to check out a classic 60s sci-fi flick, I would still recommend Doctor Who and the Daleks. And personally, I prefer this over its sequel, but the sequel is a discussion for another video. I hope you enjoyed my discussion of Doctor Who and the Daleks, and I'm curious to know what you think of the film, so be sure to tell me in the comments below. I would also greatly appreciate if you could leave a like on the video, that way more people can see it. And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing. But you've been watching The Who View, I hope to see you next time, bye for now.